research. So Professor Ndone will be talking to us today about research and data and why it matters for journalists. Brief introduction. Professor Ndone has been a practicing journalist here in Kenya, has a passion for public relations and more specifically crisis communication. He is a published scholar, has published a lot of papers that are peer-reviewed, and you have access to most of these papers. One of the latest and the most interesting that I read by Professor Ndone is a paper on COVID, and the media generally. So we are privileged to have Professor Ndone today, and what we want to have is a very interactive session where we blend the experiences that we've had, the critical issues in research and data, and then how they cleavage with the practice of journalism. So I will not take much of your time because I also don't want to introduce Professor Ndone. Let's give you a glimpse of who we have today, and I must say that we're privileged to have you. He's taken most of our students and participants here to GSS, one number of courses, and one of the most interesting one was quantitative data analysis. So when you speak about why research and data matters for journalists, he's coming from that purely quantitative tradition where he's very strong and rooted in almost all the latest softwares, all the latest techniques in quantitative data analysis. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, Professor Ndone.
Thank you, Edwin. There's always a danger of falling into over-introducing someone and then failing to meet the expectations. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And like we heard, we're just going to be talking about why research and data matter for journalists. And you've already listened to the brief introduction. So we're going to focus more on the importance of research in journalism and the importance of data-driven journalism, because those are basically the key areas that we'll be discussing mostly today. Now, as you know, currently the field of journalism is undergoing like a paradigm shift, and there's a lot of stuff going on when it comes to journalism, like stories flowing from places where they could not happen. We have multiple sources, we have eyewitnesses. We also have bloggers who have joined the fray of sharing stories. We also have the advent of citizen journalism, and that has placed journalism at an edge, or what someone would say, journalism is already under siege. And when that happens, then it makes the field needs to adjust and move with the steam, gather the steam to move with whatever is happening in the environment. And as I mentioned to you, there's a current shift in journalism, and there's so much focus on data because we always believe that data doesn't lie, but now there's that misconception that data doesn't lie, but I always say it's good data that doesn't lie. So we're going to talk about the importance of research in journalism, why does it matter, and then focus more on data-driven journalism. And when you talk about the importance of research in journalism, first of all, if you do your own research, especially if you're a journalist, it's going to give you a deeper understanding of what we're talking about. Like, it's going to allow you to dive deeper into the subject matter that we want to discuss, or we want to talk about, or we even want to write about, or even want to do a documentary about. And that is going to give you provide you a more nuanced coverage of complex issues in the society. And towards the end of this presentation, I'll just share you some story ideas that I think would fit way much better when it comes to data journalism. And again, another importance of research in journalism is the provision of broad perspective, where it allows journalists to provide a global perspective into some of the issues that are being discussed, or some of the issues that are making like headlines in the society. And that global perspective helps you see or draw connection between people and events. And also, if you do your research well, if you consider yourself a journalist and you do your research well, and you write a well-researched story, chances are you're also going to increase the credibility or your credibility as a journalist and for the media house that you work for. And this basically, remember when we talk about credibility in journalism, you're also providing an avenue for ethical reporting, because we've all had issues where journalists are failed to be ethical reporters in their daily to-day activities. So there is that aspect of building credibility for yourself and also for the media house that you work for. In addition, it helps you with issues to do with fact checking, where you can verify information, confirm the accuracy of your reporting. And this also falls into the aspect of where you're building your credibility as a reporter. Again, it can be a source for unique story ideas, because once you do your research, chances are you're going to uncover something that is new, something that is exciting, and stories that might otherwise be missed by, just someone who's just focused on getting a deadline and things like that. And that's what I always tell people, like, especially when I'm giving talks on research and journalism or research in PR, we always say, like, a well-researched story, it takes time. It calls for patience compared to stories that are just going to be done in a day or in a few, in a few hours, the 5 W's in 1 H. Now, when it comes to most of the stories that we're going to see that are well-researched, you're going to find that they appear as feature stories. So, feature stories are not normal, like the normal stories. They take time to develop. And also, another importance of research journalism, you're going to encounter expert sources, because in doing your research, you're going to identify and consult with expert people who are going to add more depth and context to the reporting that you're trying to accomplish. And also, it also helps the building trust through your research. You can demonstrate your commitment to things to do with accuracy, building trust with the audience. And at the same time, you also build honesty. Remember, all this is tied to ethical practices in journalism, because at the end of the day, you just want to be someone who is responsible in his or her daily activities. So most of the time, when it comes to research and fact-checking and social verification, it's like a chain where you have to identify some claims made by sources, and then you have to locate the sources. What are these sources, and why are they making these claims? Because once you look at the sources, it becomes easy for you to now do more research in that area. And then, as a journalist, you also need to evaluate the evidence. Is it making sense to you? Does it support the claim? Is there like a breakdown in whatever evidence that is gathered, or the source, whatever the source is giving you, and the claim that has already been made? And lastly, you also have to verify the information by comparing it to, or what are other sources, like multiple sources, what's going on, what are they saying about this same story? Because we find like relying on only one source is not enough, especially when it comes to doing research that is more concerned about journalism, or doing journalism that is research oriented or data driven. And some of the research methods for journalists, any time you do an interview with an eyewitness or an expert, you're basically conducting research. Anytime that you're requesting for public records, like let's say the census data, or issues to do with the cost of living, the economy, when you're asking this information that is supposed to be available in public, you basically conducting research in journalism. Anytime that you're doing investigative reporting, like we remember the Panama Papers, and all those people, like the rich who have hidden a lot of money abroad, that is basically research in journalism. Anytime that you're doing data analysis, like comparing data that we've already been given from, let's say, Kennedy Road Statistics, and you're looking at the census data and you're trying to make some projections. Well, anytime you're processing that data, you're basically conducting, basically doing research for journalists. And anytime you do online search or even doing social media monitoring, like you're looking at what is happening on Twitter and what are people tweeting about. That is basically part of research in journalism. And there are several software that I'm not going to get into. I don't want to get into software. But there's so much that you can do. And there's a software that we use actually to scrap Twitter's data that I can share with you later. And it's a very simple tool that you can use to get all the chunk, you get a big chunk of data from Twitter, and it helps you now to synthesize the story that you want to focus on. Now, some of the challenges that people encounter when they are conducting, research for journalists is basically there's going to be resource constraints, because research is very expensive. It's time consuming. And sometimes the smaller budgets in smaller news organizations, which have limited staff and budgets, they may encounter resource constraints. There's also the aspect of legal challenges, where even some sources may be reluctant to provide information due to confidentiality concerns, or maybe a threat of legal action. And there's also a possibility of falling into the misinformation trap, where journalists need just to be vigilant about any means of misinformation or fake news, because you may find like the data that you want to use or the information that you have may be done with a certain motive, and you just want to make sure that the information that we're going to share with the public is not going to be misleading to anyone. This is a good example that I just wanted to share with you of how research was applied in journalism, and I think this was done by this appeared in Nation, and it was done by Mercy Juma. She did an extremely good job looking at data and then trying to synthesize or trying to present it in a way that people can easily understand. Because if you think about like someone saying 7 out of 10 people, it becomes easy compared to when someone says 7% of this population. People will understand more like a smaller numbers way much better than giving them things to do with percentage and things like that. Do you expect any questions up to that point, or should we just continue and take questions at the end?
I think what we can do is, if you have questions, just write them in the chat box. And if you want to give breaks where you entertain questions, we can take those breaks and then just respond to the questions.
Yeah, I think we can go for break right now and see if there are any questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there any questions up to that point? Or like my teachers used to ask me, what questions do you have?
Not yet.
Okay, so there's no question on the chat box. But yes, yeah, the floor is open. You can shoot a question up to where we have reached before James continues. If there is any.
I had a professor who used to tell us, like, if you ask students or anyone that you're talking to, they have a question and they're quiet, there are only 2 options. It's either they've understood everything or you're just talking to yourself. Or, so, assumption is that we're doing well so far.
We're optimists. So silence means so far, you're doing well.
All right. Now, that's a brief introduction about research in journalism. We looked at some of the challenges that people, when they are doing research in journalism, are going to encounter, the importance of doing it. Now, I just want to delve deeper now into data-driven journalism, because this is where, this is like the in thing. This is what people are seriously focusing on. And I've seen a lot of media houses in Kenya, they're actually capitalizing on this. I think Nation has is a Newsplex, and then Standard has its own, and the Star also has its own. I think those are good areas, and you can see some of these stories. I think there was a story actually on Daily Nation today about the jobs pandemic, where they had some statistics and what is going on in terms of, where people are in terms of employment and things like that. So you can see how these big stories that involve data, are taking precedence in our society right now. But when it comes to data journalism, it's basically, or data-driven journalism, it's usually called journalism 2.0, just like we have PR 2.0, which is basically data-driven PR decisions. And this is usually a form of journalism that allows people or reporters to use quantitative data to uncover anything like hidden trends, patterns, or insights that might otherwise go unnoticed. And it's different from the old version of all the traditional journalism, because the traditional journalism is based on anecdotal evidence and personal experiences. But now when it comes to data-driven journalism, it's based on empirical evidence, giving readers a more objective view of a topic or an issue. But now the big question is, why does it matter? Because data journalism allows journalists to tell more accurate stories, compelling stories, impactful stories that can drive change and address social, economic, and political problems. One of the big issues that has been pushed over and over again, especially in the last 5, give or take 10 years, is the aspect of solutions-based journalism, or what we call constructive journalism. And one of the ways that you can sort of that issue is by using data, because once you present data, there's so much that you can do with data, and to tell people these are some of the solutions that we have to these problems that are affecting a certain group in a society. So you can see why it matters, because when you use data, chances are you're going to tell more accurate stories. you're going to, the stories are going to be compelling, and they're going to address any socio-economic or political problems that we have in our societies at the moment. And it's just like, when it comes to data-driven journalism, it's a process. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it takes time for you to develop a good, well-written data story or a research story. You have to do data compilation. You have to do data cleaning. After you clean the data, you have to understand the data. Does it make sense to you? Because if it doesn't make sense to you, just like it's not going to make sense to the people that are trying to share the information with. And then you have to validate the data. This is basically by comparing multiple sources. Are they giving you the same story, or are there some discrepancies in whatever is happening? And then you visualize the data. And after you visualize the data, that's when now you do the article writing, because you cannot skip a step and then come back later. You have to follow it like a chronology, because that's going to help you like have a clear picture of the article that you're going to be writing. When we talk about data compilation, it's basically you have a question that needs data, or there's a data that is available for you to question. Once you have that data, then it becomes easy for you now to start moving to the next step, because you get the data, then you start cleaning it, where you detect any errors in the data sets, like correcting, removing, corrupted, or inaccurate records from a data set. For example, if it's a data set that is available in Excel and you're trying to clean it, you may find that there's a blank or some answers that are blank. You have to delete all that stuff before you even move on to the next step, where now you start making sense of that data or trying to understand the data itself. Because for you to understand the data, you need first data literacy. You need to understand what data is and how can you use to make sense to other people. And you also need to understand statistical literacy. Like if you tell people like 7 out of 10 people are likely to die of malnutrition, or 7 out of 10 children are likely to die of malnutrition, what does that mean to you? Because if it means something to you, then chances are when sharing it with someone else, it's going to make sense to them. And then data validation, like I just mentioned, either as a journalist, you have a question that is basically asking someone like, what is going on with the data? Can you help me understand with the meaning of some of the information from this data? And then data validation is basically looking at different people who can help you like make sense of the data. Like if it's data from Kenya Bureau of Statistics, maybe now I need to talk to some of the people who are busy with the census, collecting data, and from all that, so that you see whether the information that they're giving you is consistent to the information that the data is giving you. Because data speaks to us, and when people speak to us in the same sense, then the chances are there's some congruence in whatever is happening. And then visualizing data is when you use a visual representation, where you go or do like a visual representation of the data using infographics and other tools that you may decide to use. And then depending on the medium, you proceed to the article writing, where if it's multimedia, then they want to go come up with something that is more interactive with the people, or where if they click something, there's a different color or things like that. Or you may decide if it's a different like a newspaper that is static, maybe like infographics will work better for that. So you have to choose like the best visualization tool depending on the media that you're sharing a story on.
James, I think there are a few questions. I don't know that you want to take them now.
Sure. Yeah.
Two, which I guess are related to the content that you've just spoken to.
Mm-hmm.
One is from a student at USIU who is saying that for the example you've just given, especially where it will be difficult to extract data from fields such as the medical field, how should a journalist navigate that?
So when a journalist is not able to extract data, how should they navigate it? Now, there's something I was planning to mention this as we continue with this session, is that excuse me, for you to get to that position where data can start making sense to you, you need some training. You need to understand, like you need to undergo training on data, either data analysis, or even the whole concept of what is data. Because you may find people think data is just figures. There's a lot into data. But now, without the training, it becomes difficult for you to extract that information, because you're given a file but it doesn't make sense to you. So I think the basic idea is to undergo some training so that you have a clear understanding of what data is and how to start making sense of that data. At the same time, you can be a collaborative journalist, collaborate with someone who knows how to analyze data, or with a data scientist. There's so many people who are pretty data savvy, especially in a country like Kenya. So you need to create, have these people as your fingertips, as your to go to people when you have any data that doesn't make sense to you, but you want you to use that data. So I think training, collaborating with other people, and even looking at if you're in a media house, if there are other people who have done stories in such an area that you want to pursue, may want to talk to them and see, okay, how do you manage this? And then figure out how do you move into the right direction in terms of the data that you have.
Probably the last one, which I guess is related to that one. So if you're a freelance journalist who is not well funded, how do you do quality research? And when I look at this in the first question and the response that you've given, that sometimes you need someone who understands data or you go through training. And there are a number of institutions, like here at Aga Khan, I think we have so many institutes and departments that are involved in research. Mm-hmm. And there's enough data. So even when you talk about getting that training, maybe you may also want to think of how do you embed yourself into an institution that is already doing research and has data, so that when you have access to that data, they orient you. What are the ethical underpinnings? What data can you get? And how should you report it? And then you use your journalistic enterprise. But the second question is fairly interesting. When you talk about training journalists who does not have the funding of an institution like a media house, because they are freelance, what would you say about quality analysis of data and if they need research? How do they go about it?
That's a good question. And I think I mentioned that's one of the biggest challenges that is facing research and even data journalism because of the resource constraints, where you may find like you're the editor, you're the reporter, you're everything in that media house, or even working on yourself and you don't have any support. But most of the stories that are actually dealing with data, they are getting a lot of attention from international organizations and grants are being availed. I think there's a story I was reading yesterday about, I think there are 3 ladies who are spearheading the campaign on data journalism in Kenya. I can't recall the names, but given that the issues to do with data journalism is getting a lot of traction even from an international front, it becomes easy for you to present something like a pitch to these organizations and then see if they're going to find your proposal or whatever you're working on. Because doing research, even academic research, is very expensive. Yeah. But for you to get to that level, it's the same thing, because it's the same concept that we're going to use when it comes to journalism. So for a small media house or for someone who's a freelance journalist, my advice would just be, look for avenues where you can pitch your ideas, or even like if there are some organizations that you can, just like you're mentioning, you can then embed yourself into that are doing such driving data or journalism activities. Feel free to be part of those organizations.
Thank you. I think we can move on. Then we'll give us another break for the question.
Okay, cool. All right. So most of the data that people use when it comes to data journalism, we have geospatial data. We're basically looking at maps, satellites, data, or what we call geographic information systems that are used to uncover patterns and trends and to visually communicate important geographical stories. I was reading a story, I think, on Friday about the immigration patterns, like how people move from either South Sudan to Kakuma, and then from Kakuma they end up in the USA, and where they usually concentrate in the USA. So it's an interesting story that we can even follow from South Sudan because of the wars that are, or even Somalia, because of the wars that are going on there. You follow, okay, where do they concentrate into Kenya and why do they choose certain places compared to other places? And when they move to the US, why do they choose to live in a certain region? And in this case, you can use things like heat maps that are used to present data. And then you can, use any other form that is going to be to make your that you're familiar with by the way that you can easily understand and share with other people. And you can also use data that is available from documentaries like government reports, court documents, and other official records that are used to expose things to do with corruption, injustice in society, and abuse of power. Because once, if you are skilled, because data journalism calls for skills. If you're skilled enough, it becomes easy for you to extract or mine these sources to uncover any hidden gems in terms of new information. Survey data, like last year when there was a lot of opinion polls about who's going to become the president, and opinion polls from different organizations. I used to question a lot of how they collected their data, because we find like someone's giving a margin of error of 4, and then when you add when you do a tallying, the data is adding to like 96%. What's happening to the 4%? And the way they collect the data, especially, and these are some of the collaborations have been done with the media houses in Kenya actually, where they'll collect data and then they'll say like we did the survey data and they were using telephones. So if you're calling people and you're trying to get their opinions about, like who's your preferred presidential candidate, and we're collecting these data through telephones. How about the people who are in the grassroots, they don't have telephones, how do we reach to them to get their opinions? And that's why it's always advisable when we're dealing with the data, especially opinion polls, you have to interpret them with a lot of caution. Yeah. And then we also have like numeric data that like I was mentioning, data from organizations like Kenya Bureau of Statistics that could be numeric in nature. And then once you have that, now it becomes easy for you to mine the data and then uncover any patterns in terms of population growth, where are people more concentrated currently, and things like that. And with data journalism, it becomes easy for you, it's a very effective tool. It helps you improve accuracy of your reporting, and it gives you confidence. Even as a reporter, it becomes easy for you because you're dealing with more informative stories. You have confidence in whatever data that you have, and you can also make impactful reporting with data-driven research, because it can be a powerful tool where holding anyone who's in power accountable. If someone is giving you stories that don't add up, but you have the data to contradict that information. You can always cite the data and see why they're giving you the stories that are not adding up, and that helps you keeping those people in power in tow, so that they can stop BSing around and helping other people, or helping the people that put them into power. And like I mentioned in the beginning, it can also give you some insights to new stories, or even give newer perspectives to old stories that have already been covered. You may find you do a new story today, and then from that new story, based on whatever you encountered in the story, you may find, okay, I need to dig deeper into this story and do a feature. And you may find data is going to help you accomplish your goals. Then I think I've already talked about some of the challenges that we face in data-driven journalism. Access to information becomes one of the biggest challenges, because most of the data is not available in public. And then we also have issues to trustworthiness and transparency. People will always question, what's the motive of this story? Why did people collect this data? Because if you get data from an NGO, and you find that NGO is being funded by an organization, chances are they're only collecting that data so that they can use it to get more funds from that organization. So in such a scenario, then it becomes difficult for you to learn that data, which can be misleading if you don't interrogate the data pretty well. Then the technical aspect, you need special skills for you to be in a position to talk about data basically. And lack of organizational support, like the question was suggesting there, we not have enough resources to work on any data-driven stories. And some of the successful data stories that I've already read, you remember from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the Panama Papers, where they talked about how powerful leaders in the world are shoving the money in abroad and other funny places so that they can evade tax, and it's part of money laundering. If you look at that story and the way it was covered in sessions, they find they did a lot of research, and that is something that started in 2015, and then it was aired, I think, last year or last year, but one. So you can see how long it took for that story to materialize, to get to that level of where the journalists were like, okay, now we're confident enough, this is a story that can be aired. So like I was mentioning, it becomes difficult. It calls for patience for you to practice data journalism. Oh, there's that, the story of, I think this guy was from Makuyu and sorry, where it was, I think it was on Daily Nation, the case of poverty that drained man 700,000 within a week. You can see the statistics, the amount of money that he had in the bank on Thursday, then the money that he withdrew on Friday, up to Monday where he was left, up to Tuesday where he was only left with 8 shillings in his bank account. So you can see we have some statistics here, information that is supporting that, that is giving more information about the stats, and then what happened in such a scenario. And, we cannot talk about data journalism without visualization, because we know that so many people are like visual beings. And for you to get to that level, you need to combine storytelling with data. You need to provide context to what we're talking about. You cannot just give data and say, okay, 10 people or 7 out of 10 people are X, Y, Z, without giving a context to that. Any contextual information could be geographical, could be historical background, can help people understand complex issues. And you can also talk about, interpretation and analysis. You should present graphs to people. And then you're assuming like everyone understands what the graphs mean. You all need to explain like, what is this graph? What is it talking about? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to confuse your viewers or your readers or whoever is listening to you. I think about data journalism as photojournalism with just a laptop. It's like you're just swiping your camera for a laptop. But now that laptop needs some software where you can analyze some data. Or it's basically like number crunching, leading one smoothly. You have these numbers and you have to bridge the gap between the two. And like I mentioned, this is where journalism is at the moment, and it's presenting a good area for the future of journalism. And it's, I think it's the high time that people need to equip themselves with requisite skills that are required for data journalism. And it also helps provide an independent interpretation of official information. Like if the government is giving you stories about COVID-19 information, cases and jobs, and deep down, this is not making sense to you. You need to dig deeper into that data and start asking questions, scrutinize that information. And we also talk about the PR or data-driven PR. Now journalism or data-driven journalism is the remedy to, or the answer to data-driven PR, because once these people who work in PR give you certain information, it gets to a point where now, okay, journalists need to sharpen your skills or a critical sense of that information, so that they are not just giving information so that you give them a coverage, whereas in real sense it's not making sense to anyone. And it can also help our journalists do the data deluge, which is basically like a overlay. When you have so much data, then you start chiseling simple data from all that. And data journalism can also help you see things in ways that you might not, a normal eye cannot see. Where most of these now needs the nodes for data. And like I mentioned, it is also a way for you to tell richer stories. Now, we cannot talk about data journalism without talking about the ethical issues that are associated with it, because there are issues to do with the transparency. You just need to be clear which is your source of data, what is the method of analysis, is there any conflict of interest? Because if that is not clear, then it becomes people who understand data will start questioning the motive when it comes to talking about that story. You can also talk about accuracy verification. You must ensure that the data is properly collected, analyzed, and is reliable. And this is what I was mentioning, like you have to do member checks, or you have to confirm or verify this data or validate the data with other sources, rather than relying on the data itself. What are other sources like? People who collected the data, what are they saying about the data? And what is basically common with what was the motive behind collecting of the data? Because once you understand the motive, it becomes easy for you to talk about other issues like, to be transparent in whatever you're reporting about. And data can also be biased. can be skewed. So you also have to take care of that in terms of being fair and objective. And also need to deal with our issues to do with privacy. You also have to consider, is there any personal data that you cannot share, or you need to protect the individual's privacy? If it's a matter of public interest, then we also have to weigh in and see what is happening. If it's like you find yourself in a situation where you say, if you don't do it, you're damned. And if you do it, you're damned too. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation. So you have to weigh all these ethical dilemmas that we face. And the same way you hold those in office accountable is the same way as a data journalist, you should hold yourself accountable in your own reporting, in your own analysis, and be careful not to fall a victim of manipulation of data, things to do with misrepresentation of data and things like that. And some questions that you can just ask yourself: does the information serve a journalistic or a public interest? What would be harmed by the information? Are there alternatives? Can the data be verified? All these questions are questions that should be weighing once you start interrogating the data that you have. And some of the best practices that I just want to mention briefly.
You want to mention, or we field a few questions?
We can field a few questions.
Okay. So very interesting questions. Joyce Gituro is asking, how practical is data journalism considering the push for breaking news in the current news culture?
Can I take that one first? Or?
Yeah, you can take that one.
So, like, if you, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's data journalism is not something that is for the faint-hearted. You just need to be patient when it comes to dealing with data. You can actually do the breaking news story first, and even focus on, okay, dig deeper into that story to see what is happening, what is going to happen, like what's that the information that we're getting from that breaking story. Is it enough? Is it enough for the consumption of the public? But if you ask yourself that question and find like, oh no, it's not enough, then now you start digging deeper into the story to see, okay, what are the uncovering patterns? Like, what is happening? Why is this story breaking? And what are some of the statistics to support a certain aspect? So it's practical, but it calls for patience.
So is there a way you can break the news, but then take your time with data and do a more robust story that add context, details on the breaking news?
Yes.
So the second question was from one of the participants who is asking, what would be your comment, given that a lot of data that sometimes journalists have access to is stale data? So, like the census that was done in this country was in 2019, but we still have stories that are done today on, the population of Kenyans, stories that are done based on projections. And, when you talk about accountability, ethics, and all that, and verifying that data, what happens if the root data that you're basing your story on is probably 5 years old, but you're using your research instincts, and other sources of data to just do the projection? What would you say about it?
So if you find like the data that you have is stale or it's old, like I mentioned, what you need to do is do validation of that data. Ask other sources. Does this data make sense up to this point? Because like in Kenya, where census is done after 10 years.
Yeah.
So the data that we have for census, if it was done last year, that's the data that we're going to use for the next 10 years. When you have a story that relies on census, you have to mention like census that was done in 2022 and projecting the population growth. And what happens with census data, as an ethical journalist, you just have to mention this was census that was done in a certain year, because you have to be transparent in whatever you're doing. So if it's data that is old, it's stale, you can use it, but now you have to do to dig deeper and ask experts or other sources or people who might be having more information about that data, whether it's still holding water up to this point or like there's some changes that need to be done. And it doesn't hurt to say like as per what we have now, as per the current information, as per the current data, that is what is available. If there's something else that is not available, then you just say it's not available.
Okay. So the last one is a very interesting one. It's from Arnold Ageta. So Arnold is looking at data and radio stories. How do you visualize that data or stories on radio?
For radio stories.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, because now, radio is not a visual medium.
Yeah.
So in such a case is where now you need to break it down to, more palatable way. Like instead of saying things like 7%, let's say 7 out of 10 people. I think that would be easily understandable to your audience if they're listening to you, compared to giving them percentage. What is the percent? What does it have to do with me? So I think breaking that story down, or breaking the data down to chewable pieces that people can easily understand, especially those people who are listening to radio or like vernacular radio stations, basically, or even doing these stories in vernacular in a way that they can easily understand. Breaking that data into these stories into ways that people can easily understand, and that could work for radio issue. Okay, thank you. All right. Now, when it comes to best practices, it's always advisable to review the data to uncover inconsistencies and missing pieces. Always unpack the concepts that we are trying to analyze through contextualization, because if you don't provide a context for whatever is happening, then it becomes difficult for whatever you're trying to say. And then always be aware of the bell count. As you can see, the bell count is just like a bell. And you may find that there are people who are on this side and on this side, and then you ignore them clients. You may find like there are people who are creating a lot of impact into that data. For example, if you are looking at the wealth of Kenyans, and then you have someone who has like give or take 100 billion US dollars in their bank account, that person is going to skew your data to that direction. So you also have to take care of those outliers and whatever is happening in your data, because if you don't take care of those issues, chances are you're going to give out misleading information. And then you also have to follow the golden rules of journalism, basically the things rules of objectivity, harm limitation principle. And you also have to educate yourself on things that you need to do, on things that have to do with data. Because once you understand data, once you understand how it works, once you understand like how data was collected, analyzed, it becomes easy for you to now start making sense of data. It becomes easy for you even to spot when people are trying to lie to you or to mislead you with data, because you can ask them some tough questions regarding the data, and then based on the responses you can draw inferences and say, oh, something is not right with the way that you're responding to my questions or to the way this data is. So you just need to equip yourself with the requisite skills for you to be in a position to understand data and do these data stories. And some of the story ideas that I think I mentioned, I'm going to share some story ideas. You can look at something like the impact of COVID-19 on education in Kenya. We know COVID came, it's that position where we don't even know, is it gone forever, or is it going to come back and things like that, or are we going to experience another pandemic? You can look at the impact of COVID-19 on education in Kenya. And then you can also look at the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in Kenya, because we find people, and we're doing some training on COVID-19 vaccinations, hesitancy and things like that in Ghana last week. And some of the information that we're getting from the ground is that it's not like people don't want to get vaccinated. In some situations, it's the availability of the vaccine. Like people don't know where to go get vaccinated. So you may find out of doing a story using data like this, you will see concentrate on hit areas where people are not going for the job, and areas where dig deep and see why are people not going to for vaccinations in those areas. We can also look at the impact of climate change on agriculture in Kenya, the state of corruption in Kenya, distribution of wealth in Kenya. Those are other stories that we can look at. And then another story could be about crime and security in Kenya. See and you can highlight using heat maps to see areas where someone is likely going to get marked, for example, in Nairobi. And then once you give that information to the public, it becomes easy for them to be aware and avoid or be careful when they're working around those areas. And the story that was Daily Nation about unemployment and the job market. So that's another data story that I think was pretty compelling, based on how it was told. And then gender inequality and women's empowerment. That's another story to see are we at that point where we've already empowered our women to the level that we really want, or there's some gaps and things that need to be done? And then issues to do with road safety and traffic accidents, can help you understand, okay, which areas are likely to have more traffic at what time. Because you have a tendency to believe that there's more traffic in the morning because people are going to work, and there's more traffic in the evening. But what about outliers where you're going from Thika Road to Aga Khan, for example, and you get stuck in traffic for 1 hour? Is it an outlier, or is it something that happens every day? So those are some of the stories that people can easily look at. And you can also do a story about healthcare accessibility in Kenya, how many doctors do we have that are serving a certain number of patients in a county or things to do with that. And as I wind up, my call to action is for the media organizations. They just need to invest in training the journalists in both technical and ethical skills to meet the challenges of data journalism. They also need to be a journalist or as communicators. We also need to champion transparency by just performing transparently, allowing readers to access any claims that we have and verify the data and the methods that we're using. And I always emphasize collaboration over cooperation when it comes to data journalism, because you may decide, okay, I'm going to give a scoop about data, but then you find you don't have the requisite skills to talk about that data set. If you collaborate with someone else who can help you, sharing resources, expertise to increase the quality and the impact of data journalism worldwide. And with that, I open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ndone. Dan, I can see there's a hand raised. I don't know whether we can give you the floor to you.
From Joyce Gituro and Abraham.
Cool. We can start with Abraham. Abraham, go ahead with your question. If you unmute Abraham and Joyce. Abraham, are you still there?
I think we lost you.
Okay, Joyce. Joyce, go ahead. Tell us where you're joining us from. Then your question.
Yes, or
I think can we encourage them to write questions
Okay.
instead of unmuting them?
Yeah, there's a question. Okay, Joyce is trying to connect our audio, but there's a question here that asks about can opinion polls be misleading as it was during last year's elections? Yes, I questioned a lot of opinion polls last year because based on the nature that the data was collected and based on the nature that the data was analyzed, that we cannot talk about. We interviewed 100 people and you give even 2,000 people, and then you're trying to use that data to generalize over a large population. It becomes difficult because, first of all, you have to question whether was this population or was this sample representative of the entire population? Because 2,000 people, where you have 500 people from Nairobi, 500 from Mombasa, 500 from Central Kenya, and then 300 from Rift Valley, 200 from XYZ. That data is not representative of the population. And that now is a questionable data set because you cannot rely on it. There was a study that was done the big Martha Karua impact based on an opinion poll. And I questioned the motive of that story because I was yes, you may have some impact, but how was the data collected? The data held a lot of flaws, like margin of error, where you're even adding figures to percentages and you're getting to 95% and 4%. Where is the 6% going? So you also have to be careful as a journalist when someone is trying to BS you with the data that they're giving you.
Too bad my computer. Okay, so Joyce, but you can type your question, Joyce. We saw the first one, which Prof responded to. You can just type the second one. I don't know. Any other question? John? But just coming back to the question of opinion polls and generalization of data. What really is that data that can be generalized? And what would you say is rigor that is enough for anyone who understands data and research to say that this is very credible data, the way it was generated, the methodology, this is credible? What is the threshold?
So, as much as I'm a quantitative researcher, I'm a big advocate for mixed methods. Because as quant researchers, we tend to believe the numbers and believe everything is credible that we're getting from these numbers. But now we also have that bias where someone may be giving us only answers that we feel, or they feel like we want to get. For example, if I'm in central Kenya and I'm looking at asking people like the big, like is Martha Karua, having any impact on the grassroots? Someone is yes, but deep down that person doesn't want to. They're just giving me that answer because they think that's the answer that I want. So, in a situation, just to answer your question, in a situation where you just want to, get to a point where you feel like yes, this data is credible, I think it will make more sense once you have the quant data. Go and identify some key people in that population to do qualitative research. Interview them so that you get their ideas, and it's easy for you to use categories to see, okay, is this qualitative data and this quantitative data going hand in hand? Because you may find like there are some discrepancies in whatever they are telling you, or based on their opinion, or based on the survey that you're collecting data with, or based on the information that you're going to get from quantitative research. Because even when you have a population where you've already collected data and you have like 50, give or take, 50% of the population are male and 50% of the population is female, there are some key characteristics into that 50% male and that 50% female that you cannot do with quantitative research. So you have to dig deeper and ask yourself, okay, what's the composition of this 50%? Yes, they are female, but what are their characteristics? Yeah. What's their age groups and things like that? Yeah. Okay. So I think mixed method would be a good approach to get that data. Or you collect this data and then after a while you do the same data. You collect the same data so that you can try to. It's like you basically trying to see whether the results that you got from the first data collection, the second data collection, that are going in tandem, or there are some discrepancies in the data set.
Just to ensure that whatever you have at the end of the day is reliable.
Is reliable, yeah.
Now, Michael, I have another question, but this is from Michael. Michael Musioka, who is asking, what are the efficient and affordable data interpretation, visualization tools that one can use for scientific stories?
RStudio.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a software that I use called RStudio. It has the best visualization tools that we'll ever get. And it's free, it's easy, you can train yourself how to use it. And then you can learn how to visualize different data sets, use different colors for different graphs and things like that. So that's one software that you can use. Or even the normal Excel graphics that you get from like those bar graphs, pie charts and all that. If you find that your audience is going to understand that better, use that. Because there's so much that you can do. There's so much, there are so many software that you can use, or even simple tools like bar graphs, bar charts, and pie charts to visualize your data. You don't have to be complex, because at the end of the day, if you use a complex method that people cannot understand, then it becomes like you do zero.
Now, my final question, and I'm sure there are so many scholars in this meeting who are also researchers, either here at AKU or in other universities. There's a lot of research that is produced outside there. And looking at your professional journey, you practice as a journalist, but now you're in the academy. You're producing new knowledge. And there's so many other researchers in different fields, in climate change, in health, medical field, population, and all that. I think research communication is one of the key things that they probably lack. And that's the reason why there's research that is lying in libraries and people don't have access to that. And on the other hand, there are journalists who are looking for information out of this world, new findings and all that. How do they interpret this data or this research to write public interest stories? And once they have that research paper, what are the key things they focus on? Because the natural thing to do is, these are the findings that the study was done by the Graduate School of Media and Communication. This is what they say about millennials and Gen Zs. But now that we're talking about why research is important in journalism, where does the other bit of the methodology, the rigor in the choices that have been made come into the story? So much so that if we do research here and I give a journalist, what should they pick from that research and write a story from?
That's a good question. So if you want, let's say you've done research and you want a journalist to pick that story, and basically what they need to get from that, or from the story from the research that you've done, I think the key idea is to look at the abstract of that story, or of the manuscript that you already wrote. Because the abstract is going to give you like an overall view of what is really happening into that paper. And then for you to get to that position where you understand that data, you end up reading everything in that paper. But first look at the abstract. Then in the method section, just look at the RQs and hypotheses, and to see, okay, what were the questions that this person was asking? And then look at the method that was used. Was it like quantitative method? Was it quantitative method? Or what type of method they used to collect that data? And then look at the findings or the results, the results section. Because if you look at the results, it's easy for you to look at the results and compare them to the RQs that we're already seeing, or the hypothesis that the researcher was, trying to hypothesize or to try to answer. And then the discussion section is going to give you an idea of because the discussion section is just basically unpacking the results and comparing them to what happened with our previous researchers. Yeah. So look at the abstract first, go to the literature review that is going to give you like the hypothesis and the research questions, and then look at the method that was used to collect that data. Then look at the discussion, because with the discussion, we're going to have a clear idea of what is happening in that paper. And then once you have conceptualized that, go back to the person who did that research and ask them, am I interpreting these results the way we wanted, the way we really meant with the results? Because you cannot just rely on, okay, I have the skill set. I'm skilled in interpreting data. I'm skilled in reading and understanding what is happening with data. But now you don't do member checks to see what are the, what was the intention of that person. Yeah.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
This has been very interesting, insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, we are 5 minutes past the hour, and we want to appreciate you for staying with us for the 1 hour that we've had together here. I think James is still around, and the Graduate School of Media and Communication is also open to journalists and industry players outside there. You can interact with us through our different channels. We also have a Media Innovation Center. So for those of us who had questions on, you're a freelance journalist, you don't have the resources or the institutional backing, I think we can find a way of just connecting you with the right people who have probably what you need. And you can also join our Innovation Hub, become a member. There's a high likelihood that you're going to get the right resource or get connections to the right resource, and probably have a bit of support in the kind of research that you're looking at. Thank you so much. There's a question here from Frederick. Remind him to share the Twitter data extraction tool. I know that you want to share that now.
Yeah, I've already responded to that. It's called R-Tweet by Michael Kearney. And Michael Kearney was one of my professors, actually, one who taught me how to extract Twitter data. And yeah.
Cool. That is instantaneously answered. R-Tweet by Michael Kearney. And I guess you can also reach James. It would be interesting to follow James. A lot of the things we've learned in this industry is that if you're looking for science communication, you want to interpret data or scientific papers for the mass audience, the first step would be to follow these researchers, to follow the thought leaders in these areas, know what they're doing, get to interact with them, and see how you can tap on their expertise and use your journalistic enterprise to do stories that are of public interest. I think, Christine, do we come back to you? Okay, what is the next thing that is happening at GSMC? Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We've come to the end and we really appreciate your time. See you next time. Just follow our handles. There's a lot of activities that we have here at GSMC, trainings, fellowships, Media Innovation Center activities. You'll get that information if you are on our social media handles. Once again, it's been a pleasure being with you. My name is Hesbon Hansen Ochilmawila, and I'm here with a team. Most of them are actually, behind the scene people. They don't even want to be mentioned, but they're doing an amazing work here to get us some of these conversations with stakeholders, journalists, and just different experts in the industry. We also have one of our own here, Lennox, who is a student in our MADJ program. MADJ is Masters of Arts in Digital Journalism. We also have another program called Executive Masters in Media Leadership and Innovation. Thank you and have a great afternoon. Thank you, Professor Ndone.
Thank you.
It was great having you.
Yeah, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your questions. And I look forward to hearing from you soon and getting to interact with you more about data and stuff.
Thank you.